Hello and welcome to The People's AI, presented by Gensyn. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, and today we're diving into one of the most crucial topics of AI, how to preserve privacy. And I'm proud to partner with Gensyn to bring you this episode in season 2 of The People's AI. Gensyn is a protocol for machine learning computation. It's building the network for machine intelligence that includes execution, communication, verification, and coordination software across every viable computer or device on the planet. And Gensyn is part of the larger ecosystem that's working to build privacy-preserving AI. So what does that mean exactly, and what are the stakes? To explore privacy in AI from a couple of different angles, today you'll hear from two guests. First, Marta Belcher, the president of the Filecoin Foundation. She's also the general counsel and head of policy at Protocol Labs. She's the chair of the board of the Blockchain Association. And because she has so much free time on her hands, she is also on the board of the Zcash Foundation. Now, I first interviewed Marta a couple of years ago for CoinDesk, and I know she is one of the leading authorities on digital privacy, how it's at risk, why it matters, and what we can do to preserve it. In our conversation today, Marta gives a great breakdown of the ways in which our privacy is threatened in the age of AI. Some ways you've no doubt already thought about and probably freaked out about, and others you might not have considered. So sorry to give you more things to freak out about. And then for another angle, I am delighted to be joined by Jiahao Sun, the CEO of Flock. Here we get a bit more technical, as Flock is explicitly working on building privacy-preserving AI. And as Jiahao shares in our conversation, the tech is already being used by hospitals in the UK and Korea. Now, on a personal note here, as I share a bit later in the pod, I've been spending quite a bit of time speaking with CEOs of normal businesses about how to use AI, helping with strategy, answering questions. And one thing almost every CEO is worried about is protecting their data. It's becoming clearer and clearer to me that AI and privacy is not really a crypto and AI issue. It's a business issue, like a basic business issue, a corporate America issue. Companies need to know their data is safe. And kind of sneakily, Web3 AI are building those solutions that mainstream business owners will appreciate. So given how much money is at stake, that gives me some hope this is a problem that might eventually get solved. So we have today a two-part conversation, and let's get things started with Marta Belcher, the president of the Filecoin Foundation. Marta, welcome to the People's AI.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here chatting with you.
So we spoke like a while ago, like 2.5 years ago, maybe more, for an article that I wrote for CoinDesk before the AI boom, the AI hype cycle, and kind of theme of our conversation was privacy and online privacy in our era, kind of how important it is to you. And so I say this as backdrop to say, this has been a core theme for you for a long time. Talk a bit about your background and how that nudged and informs the importance for you of digital sovereignty and online privacy, and then we'll kind of get to how that fits into the AI picture in a bit.
Awesome. Yes, so I'm a lawyer by training and specifically focus on technology and civil liberties. And so I started out really focusing on technology in general, and I got into the crypto space back in 2015 because I was so interested in the way that the technology could really import the civil liberties protections of cash into the online world. So that for me is really what sort of made me interested in crypto, back before, before it was really something people were talking about, specifically thinking about things like I care a lot about financial surveillance. And so the ability to actually take the ability of cash to make anonymous transactions and do that online, I think is super powerful. And also, the sort of censorship resistance, right? Which, whether that's financial censorship resistance or other censorship resistance. So that's how I initially got into this crypto world, initially as an attorney, just representing companies in this space relatively early on. And then I got involved with Filecoin and with the team that was building Filecoin because I was so interested also in how we can not only take civil liberties and apply them to financial transactions, but also embed civil liberties into the next generation of the web at the storage layer. So really spoke to the things that I cared about. And so got very, very involved early on in Filecoin and was the person who launched the Filecoin Foundation and have built that up and run the governance body of the Filecoin network.
So as you said, you've been doing this, not your words, but before it was cool, before it became at all hypey. There are many folks who for years have cared about this, but a lot of folks who are just now coming to AI realizing, holy shit, whoever controls AI might be learning like everything about us, right? When I gave the opening speech to AI Summit last year at Consensus, I kind of gave this metaphor of I had this like puppy. So it wasn't a metaphor, it was reality. I was feeding ChatGPT information about my new puppy all the time because I didn't know how to raise a puppy. And so I'm like, oh, what happened when like my puppy Mojo, he ate some deer poop. Is that bad? Like, yes, it was, by the way. And as I always think,
Oh, no.
he's fine. Little guy's fine.
Okay, good.
He might actually bark in a bit to make a cameo here. So he's fine.
Good.
But the point is, I realized that ChatGPT soon knew all these intimate details about everything about my little dog. And soon, if we're not careful, it can know everything about all of us. And it will have the ability to understand us intimately and then wield this information in ways that God knows how. So that's kind of what was my oh my moments. Talk a bit about how you see the threat of centralized AI and the way AI is currently being built in its mainstream way and privacy. What concerns you the most?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me caveat by saying I am absolutely a techno optimist and someone who really believes in the power of AI and all the amazing things that AI can
Same.
do. So
Yep.
I truly do think AI is an amazing technology. But as with any other technology, it really has the ability to magnify existing sort of power structures and issues. And so when you look at how powerful AI is a technology, just as it can do so many incredible, amazing things, from drug discovery to really enhancing people's day-to-day lives. At the same time, it also is such a powerful technology when it comes to being able to deeply understand individuals and really invade people's privacy. And so I think there's you talked a little bit about sort of like just like AI companies know based on your chat transcripts,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is one really big and important thing. I think when you look at chat transcripts, for me as well, it's disproportionately things that are incredibly intimate, like a lot of medical details.
Yeah.
The fact that the technology is so good is what makes you willing to put in
Yeah.
things that are, that you otherwise might not, right? I mean, really, when you look back through your, if you don't have it on auto delete and you actually are looking back through your log, that's like, wow, this is actually really embarrassing.
Oh yeah.
And like, so I think there's that aspect to it. But I think even more important is because the technology is so powerful and can take an array of information that's out there and available publicly, and really create a pull it together and create a profile of you. It can kind of do in 1 second what an NSA analyst would do in maybe a few days, right? And that is really where I am super concerned, particularly from a surveillance perspective, right?
Mm.
The ability for this technology to especially when it's used by governments, for example, to really look at everything that's out there, especially when you combine it with facial recognition
Mhm.
technology, and also just the massive amount of data that governments have already been collecting about us, right? A lot of that data that's been collected for many, many, many years by government surveillance programs has just been sitting in these government data centers, right? It's just like sitting there, and whatever, they could run keyword searches on it or whatever, but they weren't necessarily going to do that proactively or like dedicate resources to it if, unless there was some real reason
Mm,
to. But when you combine it with the amount of data that they have and combine it with AI and say, well, now we can let AI loose on this, massive amount of data that they've been sort of
mm.
sucking up through government surveillance programs, you really, really get to a scary situation where that, people's like fundamental civil liberties and privacy interests, as it relates to the government, are potentially, deeply undermined. So I'm particularly concerned about the use of the technology for government surveillance.
It's almost like there's this dormant years or decades, just like oceans of data that it can now be catalyzed and activated, almost like sleeper cells of data, if you will, that can be activated. Um, that's chilling. What types or categories or like verticals of data do you find concerning here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, I think that when you think about what AI can do, it can do things that are really, even beyond what we kind of currently think about. And so, like, for example, I will now sometimes check with AI before I post a photo online, and say, what location do you think this is? And it is
Mm.
shocking. For example, the other
Mm.
day I was going to post a picture of myself on a beach, and I totally generic beach. Could not be more generic, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing here that could tell you where it is. And I put it into Perplexity and was like, where is this? And it was within 1.7 miles, like based on a generic beach photo, just like, well, there's coral. Yes, there's coral in the sand, right? And so and it's obviously on the west because of the position of the sun. So it was like, right. And so one of the things you may not even be thinking about with the information that's out there about you is location data, right? Almost any photo that's posted now, I mean, the vast majority of photos that
Yeah.
have, some amount of background can really place you, your exact location. So that's like, so
Mm.
location is one example of how there's information beyond what we even think we're putting out there. And then the second is, data that, is about even just like sentiment, right? Like even just like
Mm.
sentiment analysis,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That AI can do that wouldn't really have been possible in like a purely textual, pre AI world, right? So there's all sorts of new, data sources that can really, or that can really be pulled together to create a profile of you that is,
Yeah.
and information about you, maybe just on based on stuff that's already out there publicly about you, but maybe based on, the massive amounts of data that the government has already been
Mm.
collecting through their, various surveillance programs, in the United States and outside the United States, right? So, um, it's really amazing how much even an unmotivated actor in
Yeah.
1 second could learn about you using AI.
Luckily, no one ever posts anything about politics with any sentiments, positive or negative. So I'm sure nothing will go wrong there. I'm sure that will not be abused. You gave some great examples. Any other issues that not enough folks are aware of, that people are sleeping on in the world of privacy?
Well, I think that there are some really interesting and difficult questions that, um, people need to think through when it comes to, consent about what information is, AI is trained on.
Yeah.
And I am a, just to again put it out there, I am a big believer that, we should let the robots read, right? That the robots should be able to actually go out and learn from publicly available information. That is fair use, and that it's fundamentally super important, that robots can read just like I could go out there and read,
Hmm.
right? So that's all very important. And obviously is a hot take. I think a lot of people feel differently, but I have very strong feelings on that. But at the same time, I do think it's important, from an AI company perspective, to really think through, ensuring that when you're talking about super sensitive, personal data, what maybe even like chat transcripts, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that people are meaningfully consenting to that what data, AI is, learning about them. And I guess the other thing I would say, is I do think that, I do think that it's really important that AI is being built in countries where and by uh, people who really care about human rights, right? And so I worry a lot about overzealous regulations in the AI space, pushing AI to be developed in places where you have authoritarian regimes that
Mm-hmm.
are potentially going to be, not baking in the kinds of privacy protections that we want. And I also worry for the same reason about the AI being developed entirely by centralized companies as
Yeah.
opposed to in a decentralized way.
You mentioned regulation. Is there any regulation you would want to see or would not want to see with respect to getting AI and privacy rights?
Yeah. So I, in general, think that you shouldn't regulate a technology, but rather regulate activities.
Yeah.
So this idea like that, oh, we need to regulate AI or regulate cryptocurrency or whatever technology it is, doesn't quite make sense to me. I think as it stands, the laws that we have that exist are much more about a specific activity. So, for example, if I commit fraud, it doesn't matter if I commit fraud using the telephone or a computer, or cryptocurrency or US dollars or AI, like I'm committing fraud, right?
Love
So,
that. Love that analogy. I am stealing and using that. That is excellence.
please do. It is, I think, really important that we focus in regulations on specific activities as opposed to specific technologies. I think it's really important not to limit the development of technologies or in any way stifle the pace of innovation, but at the same time to look at specific activities and really focus on those. And I also think it's important to note that a lot of existing regulations and laws already apply to whatever technology it
Yep.
is that you're
Yep.
talking about regulating. And so in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, you can get where you need to go by applying existing laws and regulations because again, with most activities, it doesn't really matter what technology you're using. And I always worry about governments jumping in too early to regulate technologies as opposed to relying on existing laws that already target specific activities.
Okay, so let's shift to solution mode. If regulation is not the answer to kind of preserving privacy in the age of AI, what gives you most hope? What do you see as the best solutions? And let's start with Filecoin. Talk about what Filecoin is building along these lines.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let me start with Filecoin, which is to say, so Filecoin is a decentralized file storage network. You can think of it a little bit like Airbnb for file storage. And so, people who have extra computer space, hardware space, can rent that out to other people who pay to store files on other people's computers, or chopped up and encrypted pieces of their files on other people's computers. And that may sound a little bit niche, but it's really foundational and important because, when you go to a website today, almost always that website is being stored by Amazon,
Hmm.
Microsoft, or Google, right?
Yep.
And so, what Filecoin does is it creates an alternative where people are actually in control of their own data. They don't have to rely on just a few companies to protect that data, to protect it from, unreasonable government requests or hackers, and it eliminates single points of failure. So you don't have like an AWS outage where suddenly like vast swaths of the web go down for hours. Instead, you're able to have many, many copies of your data all around the world so that you don't have the data, be dependent on any one server or company. And so that's, if you can sort of think about what Filecoin does for storage and think about that in the context of AI, which is, today's internet web 2 is really fundamentally all about just a few companies and living our lives through those companies. And, one question is, do we want to replicate that with AI? So do we want to have just a few companies that can actually afford the kind of compute, that is required in order to run AI? Or do we want to have open source models that are transparent about sort of how they use your data, how they protect privacy, uh, do we want to have models where you can decentralize compute and make those open source models available in a way that they wouldn't be in this sort of centralized world? So I think decentralized AI is super, super important. And as an additional note, one of the reasons I think it's so important that 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 the robots are able to read, that they can go out and learn and train from things that are openly available on the web, is that if you have a universe where only where you actually have to license and pay for each piece of content that you're training on, then only the centralized players are going to be able to afford that, right? You're going to have to be a
Great point.
massive company in order to afford that. So I think for me, it's really important that we create a set of circumstances under which you can have decentralized alternatives to centralized AI, and you can have this open source development where you have AI models that are decentralized, and where they're open and transparent, as to and we don't have to live our lives through a handful of AI corporations.
I think one thing that's so interesting about this is it can sound on the surface like some a quote Web3 AI unquote issue, or even like a crypto bro issue if you don't hear anything else. But the reality is, this is actually an extremely mainstream business issue. I spent a lot of time talking to CEOs and business leaders about how to effectively incorporate AI in their operations. And one thing I hear all the time is they are very concerned, understandably so, about what happens to their proprietary data, what happens to customer data, what happens to their client data, their IP, the crown jewels of their IP. And they are understandably quite reluctant to just send all of that to the open AI mothership. And so these decentralized AI solutions are ironically getting to the heart of what most mainstream companies and businesses desperately need. And I think somehow that story is not really being told. The disconnect between what Web3 AI is doing and what corporate America even is saying they're thirsty for.
It's such a good point, and I think you said it exactly right, which is, fundamentally when you talk about AI, you are talking about data, right? Like
Yeah.
that is the lifeblood of AI. Whether it's what it's training on or what it's or what it's outputting, like AI is all about data. And so the question of, okay, well, where is your data being stored, right? When you put data in, or what is AI doing with that data? Like that those questions are fundamentally really important for anyone who's thinking about AI, which, let's be honest, is everyone. Like everyone is thinking about AI. Everyone is using AI. If you're not using AI, you're behind, right? Like it's that, like it is great. It's not just for when your dog eats something they shouldn't. Like it's actually like a part of people's day-to-day lives. And I think as a result, it's a really, it suddenly, data was already really important, but suddenly this question of questions about data are magnified, especially when you're talking about these machines that need massive amounts of data in order to learn and be able to do what they do, which is very important.
Beautifully said. Okay, we mentioned Filecoin's working on where in the tech stack do you see the most promise of reinforcing or preserving privacy in this AI age? What kind of solutions or possibilities out there do you think have the most potential?
Yeah, so I think that the real issue is whether creating a set of conditions under which decentralized open source alternatives to centralized AI models can exist and thrive, right? So, like, one thing that often happens in technology is you get existing big corporations that decide that they're going to sort of engage in regulatory capture and really create a set of conditions where open source projects and smaller projects, competing projects, can't actually compete. So I think that's one area where it's absolutely critical that we um, uh, are very careful about, we're talking earlier about regulations, very careful about the types of regulations that are put in place, and making sure that we can have these open source and decentralized AI models that actually can thrive, because otherwise we sort of have to just rely on these companies to embed privacy into them, and and just hope that they do, right? As opposed to having the competition available, and to have open source decentralized alternatives that are actually transparent about how they're using data, how they handle user privacy. I think it's really important that those types of models can compete, and I worry a lot about whether they will be able to, depending on the set of conditions we create.
To play devil's advocate here for a moment, to what extent do you think there's merit in the idea that the big tech companies, they know that privacy is important to people in ways it was not, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, right? And so even if we don't like trust them to be altruists, we trust them to want profit. And Apple has in the past, I'm making this up, 7, 8 years, 10 years, seem to at very least, pay a lot of lip service to, we are going to make sure everything we do has a focus on privacy preservation. And maybe it's a core value of theirs, or maybe they think, wow, this is great marketing and people trust us more. Either way, I'm hoping there is an actual legit move of the needle toward privacy. So to what extent do you think that, I mentioned how corporate America like needs and is now demanding for privacy preserving solutions. So you would think that the big players, it would be in their interest to make sure they're privacy upholding solutions. What's your response to that model or idea?
Yeah, look, I think that's great. I would love to live in that world, and I think, I think Apple's done an amazing job, overall in really holding the line on privacy and encryption. I think that's great, and I think to the extent that companies do that, that's fantastic, and that's what we want. I think at the same time, you want to have competition that that enables. I think when you don't have competition, you have less. Companies have less need to
Yeah.
heed individual privacy. I also think that regardless of what companies want, even if you have the best actors, when you have these centralized systems, you there are things outside their control that can lead to that data being compromised. So, for example, with a centralized system, you've created a giant honeypot of data, right, all stored in one place, as opposed to a decentralized system where data is stored all over the world, many different places, and you don't have that kind of central honeypot. And similarly, you can think about like the application of like zero knowledge proof technologies, where you can actually like store data in an encrypted way instead of sending it back and forth unencrypted, and verify information without actually decrypting the data. So I think there's all sorts of reasons that you would want to avoid that kind of centralized honeypot approach. And the second is just, as a like large corporation, like there's still a lot of government requests, a lot of sort of government surveillance happening, and also even just sort of like private litigation. Like there was a case relatively recently where an AI company, was a plaintiff took the position in a lawsuit that an AI company should have to preserve all of its users
Hmm.
back and forth, right? The
Yeah.
thing about your the thing about your dog, right? All of its users back and forth with the model as part of that lawsuit, even if the user had said, actually, I'm opting out of, I want, if they had turned on.
Deeply
um,
unsettling. Wow.
Yes, right. So I think even if when you have good actors, right, there are reasons that just the overall model of centralization is less good than the model of decentralization.
Marta, as we wind down here, any predictions? How do you think this will shake out? What do you think will happen down the road with respect to AI and privacy?
Yeah, look, I think AI is an incredible technology. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I really hope that the technology pushes humanity forward in a variety of ways. I really hope that a lot of that innovation happens in countries around the world, and in companies that care about innovation and also care about civil liberties and privacy. And I think it's critical that a lot of that innovation happens in an open source, transparent, decentralized way, and that we have alternatives to uh, big AI, in the same way that we've been able to create alternatives to big tech when it comes to file storage.
Your lips to God's ears. Marta, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was part one of this episode. And now for a more technical view of the problem, we'll hear from Jiahao Sun, the CEO of Flock. Jiahao, welcome to the People's AI.
Hey, Jeff. Nice to meet you, everyone.
Let's jump into the problem we're trying to solve. Largely speaking, the problem of privacy or lack thereof in the kind of quote unquote normal AI space or traditional AI development. How would you describe the privacy issue or privacy problem?
Okay, so actually, my name is Jiahao Sun, CEO and founder of Flock. I actually worked in traditional finance industry for like 10 years as their global head of AI. So my curiosity about this data silo issue actually happens, rooted from there, where I work in regulated businesses. I know that data cannot be shared, even within a same business, between different teams, the data cannot be shared, right? Then
Mm,
that creates a lot of issues, especially for those large language models or large models. If you want to build a better model, you definitely need more data. Then that's a dilemma,
mhm.
right? You either gonna mess all the data together, or you have to only just have a smaller model that works only on your own small tasks. Which in most cases, large language models cannot be trained well enough because you only just have a handful of small data that you got.
Yeah.
So that's actually the one of the focuses or the problems that privacy AI type of the whole industry was talking about. It's not only just about people carelessness about some of their own privacy. It's actually even about without private AI, many of the industries just cannot use AI at all.
Right.
Like even nowadays, many banks, many hospitals, it's not allowed for their employees to actually connect to OpenAI or ChatGPT API, right? Because there's so many restrictions and so many concerns that regulatory might have.
And so at a high level, and we'll get into more detail of what you guys are
Mm.
focused on at Flock, but what are the different ways, like in the tech stack, what are the kind of different types of solutions that are on the menu? What are
All
the
right.
possibilities of how we could fix privacy?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of solutions that everyone or all the researchers has been putting together, right, trying to solve the issue. There are encryption solutions, like you probably heard ZK or fully homomorphic encryption FHE, right?
Hmm.
Those
Hmm.
ones can encrypt your data while still without revealing the raw data of yours, but still doing the computation on the other side of it on the
Hmm.
outside of the server, let's say. And there are other ways, for example, in terms of neural networks, that there are binary networks, meaning that we only just have one and zero in the neural network in terms of the AI algorithms. And
Hmm.
then we can encrypt all the data, making it only one zero and make it simple. So even for encrypted data still can be
Hmm.
calculated and trained
Hmm.
on a neural
Hmm.
network without
Hmm.
needing to decrypt it. And there are also other ways, for example, federated learning. That's one of it.
So just to pause on that,
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
first example you gave, or first kind of like a bucket of solutions of encrypted data, kind of dumb question, but is the idea that you're still more or less developing AI in the same centralized way, but you're kind of like inserting
Encrypting the
encryption
data.
throughout,
Yeah,
right? So it's like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's no fundamental difference in how AI is being
Uh,
trained.
well,
Yeah.
exactly. Well,
Okay.
that's a nice catch. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, that's actually a good conclusion over it. Yes. So it can run the same way as we train models, AI models today. But the only
Hmm.
thing is either solution or none of the solution as of today are efficient enough. Like they're super
Hmm.
inefficient that
Hmm.
even a simple regression model, meaning the very
Hmm.
simplest model of AI,
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
cost a huge amount of time to get trained. So it's
Okay.
definitely not a solution as of today, but it's definitely a very charming solution in the future
Yeah.
when the turning point comes, right? When everything becomes so smooth, and yes, it's cool. Other cluster of the solutions, as
Yep.
you hinted already, yeah, that's called decentralized computation, right? Or decentralized training, meaning that okay, since encrypting and training on the encrypted data are
Hmm.
so inefficient as of today, why
Hmm.
don't we thinking it in another way? We make compute happens as close as possible to the data source. So we don't have
Hmm.
to collect all the data into one single API or server. So that's
Hmm.
kind of like decentralized compute solution or
Hmm.
decentralized training solution. Yeah,
Hmm.
where there are a cluster of them as well. There's federated learning, meaning that,
Hmm.
okay, so we have local model deployed. So every time we train the model locally and we only update the change of the model or call it gradient of the model,
Hmm.
and then merge that model with other models across the world, across the network to make sure that none of the user's raw data had ever been uploaded to any other third party.
That's a beautiful segue into Flock. How is Flock cracking this problem of privacy?
Yeah. So actually, the name Flock is a pun. It's a combination of federated learning blockchain, right? So what we are focusing on, as the name already suggested, right, is this federated learning. So that we use a blockchain to do the on-chain governance, while using federated learning to make sure all the user's data keeps local, while we
Hmm.
train the model in a class collaborative way. So it's not something like super new, but it's also still a very new technology and promoted by Google since 2017. Like many of the software, many of the phone input softwares, right? They use
Hmm.
federated learning today, both Google and Apple, like your typing habits. They want to preserve your privacy, so they don't upload all your typing history into a cloud and
Hmm.
then training the
Hmm.
model saying, oh, what you gonna type next? Because that's
Hmm.
so dangerous. I probably
Hmm.
be typing down my password or probably be
Hmm.
typing down something else, right? I don't want everyone to see it. So that's the solution at that time as a very key usage for federated learning. But there are always issues behind this, which I've seen maybe two big scandals
Hmm.
recently about those centralized. Well, it's actually one of the biggest software companies in the world that they claim they're doing, privacy preserving model training, but actually they just send your data back because there's nobody governing them. It's a centralized control, right? So that's why we always want to bring some kind, a transparent degree of the governance to this training process, which blockchain can solve it and very smoothly. Like
Hmm.
every transaction that can be clearly audited on chain, they can see clearly, oh, never have my data being transmitted to anywhere else. It's all just safely on my own device. So yeah, that's the reason behind why we want to do Flock or federal learning and blockchain, why they merge together into this solution.
I know this is maybe a straw man. This is not how it works today. But like historically, before Lightning Network, before we have other faster chains with Bitcoin, right? Like
Mm.
historically, like layer one OG Bitcoin, every 10 minutes, right? There's this cycle happens. Like, and it's like
Yeah.
slow. I remember like, I've written on Bitcoin for a long time. Like years and years ago, I wrote one of the early articles. I'm trying to buy coffee with Bitcoin, right? And like, what the hell? It's taking
Hmm.
forever. It's costing, it's
Uh-huh,
so
uh-huh,
I say
uh-huh.
this. I'm well aware that's no longer how things work in Web3, but I'm wondering, can blockchain move at this speed that AI training requires, right? So imagine just as you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier up top, that when you encrypt data and then pump that in to a centralized training framework, it's a lot slower. It's a lot more energy intensive. It's harder to do. It's more costly. And so it's tough to train that way. So I'm wondering, can you help me kind of reconcile that
Mhm.
with how blockchain can be inserted into this framework and not have it slow things down so there are serious performance compromises or challenges? Like how can it be
Yeah.
fast enough to still compete?
Yeah. I would say, first of all, with the development of Ethereum after 10 years,
Yeah.
well, congrats to them.
Yeah,
But it's
happy anniversary, Ethereum, of course.
yeah. So there's been so many upgrades, and there have been so many L2 builders, right, trying to bring the speed up.
Yeah.
Like Near always trying to be the fastest,
Hmm.
and Base nowadays also upgraded their network to make it fast. But of course, as Jeff you said, it's certainly not at the same level as centralized AI
Right. And
clusters,
I'm clear. I
because
know just for all of my crypto friends out there well aware that it's not the speed we're 10 years ago. I get that it was so much faster. It is very fast, but I would still think as fast as all the solutions are,
Yeah.
it still feels like it'd be a speed bump at the very least in the AI training. So I'm wondering to what extent is it
Yeah.
a kind of like additional friction or like make it tougher to kind of like quickly develop have AI
Mhm.
advance at the speed that we want?
Yeah, yeah. So that's why. So when we actually deploy this mechanisms when using federated learning and blockchain together, we have to figure out such challenges, of course, and then how to overcome them.
Hmm.
So that's one of the solutions we mentioned before, right? So we have a foundation model being trained in a centralized way, which doesn't touch users' data at all. So
Mm.
basically, it's a sample data training that make
Hmm.
this model get used to the scenario or the business scene
Okay.
of this specific usages,
Yes.
and then we deploy those smaller models into the user's devices. While it only requires user to have one or two, few or in technical terms you call them one shot or few shot learning. Only
Okay.
a few shot of learning that to make the model having impactful change over the real data. So yeah, so it's
Mm.
it's also a specific domain in academia. They just call it zero-shot learning or one-shot learning. So, or in fine-tuning way, there are people develop many interesting algorithms regarding LoRa fine-tuning or other fine-tuning techniques. Meaning that
Hmm.
we don't have to when it comes to users' own devices, we don't have to train all the layers of the parameters,
Hmm.
right?
Sure.
Because we can assume even if a same person going to a new business or change a job, go to a new job, right? You
Yeah.
don't have to learn everything from your baby day one,
Right.
because all the
Right.
common sense you learn in your life are useful. You don't have to
Right.
learn everything from scratch. You just need to understand some of the business sentences or business terms of it. So
Great
that's
analogy. Yeah.
where we call the last several layers of a model. So there's maybe like tens of thousands of layers. We only actually need to change the last several layers of the model because that's where we can actually tune the output of the model without needing to change the whole common sense of your entire life history, right? So that's the energy about this. So that's how it works. So we can have low latency enough
Hmm.
tolerance on all this on chain orchestration, but still make it meaningful on the user's data, and also we don't transmit users' data out.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And talk a little bit about how the tokenization and tokenomics fit into this.
For us, the design of the token itself is actually rooted to the technology itself, because we're building actually an open system comparing to, as I mentioned, Google, Apple doing
Hmm.
federated learning, right? It's all centralized control, right?
Hmm.
So it's hard for users, general users, to see what actually they're doing behind the scenes. But with blockchain, everything's auditable. But then there's a challenge come out of this. That is, if it's an open system, there will definitely be devils who are trying to just destroy your system, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that someone may be trying to bring some poisonous data just to
Yeah.
make your a machine or make your model running worse because they might be
Mm.
your competitors, right? So
Hmm.
that's why. So one very important part of the token is for the on-chain governance and the staking mechanism. So people have to stake in to join the training, so that
Hmm.
if there's any wrongdoing of this single node, it will get slashed. So in that sense, the game theory behind it is if the cost of being evil is well, it's not covered by the incentive out of it, right? Then there will be less of the incentive for people to actually be doing those things. So
Hmm.
that's the whole thing behind it. That's kind of the one of our first papers to talk about this mechanism behind Flock as a tokenomics, how it works, and we
Hmm.
published on one year of the New Rips, I think. Yeah, yeah, on 2022. That's
Hmm.
one of the top AI conferences, like maybe not even one of just top. So so yeah, yeah. So to talk about how Flock token as a tokenomics system is important into
Yeah.
the governance of this open system, right? And of course, apart from that, that's a easy thing that there are values of the token which comes as an incentive for people to join the training. So yeah, second part of it is incentive, which maybe everyone's thinking about this. So yeah, that's how for us these two major features that makes the token super important.
Thank you for clarifying that. Talk a little more about kind of what your early use cases and customers and kind of like success stories are.
Yeah, yeah. So I think healthcare is like one of the go-to scenarios that
Yeah.
we onboarded in our day one. So we started with glucose monitoring type of prediction with University College London, and then expanding that to more hospitals in the UK. And actually nowadays we just signed our agreement with one of the Korean hospitals. So it's probably one of the first research initiatives that we can do between different hospitals in different countries. And that one with Eigen Labs, that one is actually even more interesting. If you remember Google's AlphaFold some years
Hmm.
ago, talking
Hmm.
about how drug discovery can be done by the AI, right? It's cool, it's
Yep.
amazing, right? But only Google has that quantity of data. So for smaller companies like an AI company in Korea, it's actually hard
Mm.
for them to train their own drug discovery model for AI, using AI.
Mm.
So they want to bring this initiative, with us together, trying to collaborate more hospitals across the world to build this model together without, you know, kind of like breaking each country's data privacy regulations.
Mm.
So those are the very interesting use cases that we've been pushing recently. Well, we actually also, well, I understand that retail needs to get a sense of how private AI works, right? So we actually also roll out retail application with UCL recently called Baby 4D. That's like a kind of application for those new moms who
Mm.
maybe have ultrasound of their baby on week one, or I don't know, week six. And
Hmm.
then we use AI to render a baby face for them to actually pick, okay, how their how their child would look like in 10 months time, when they get
Wow.
born. Yeah, so and of course ultrasound data, medical personal data, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to
Wow.
send it
My
over to
head's
any
my head's
API.
trying to we are in a wild new world that this tech is even possible
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
that.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
like quite
that's
retail,
insane.
and
Yeah.
because I don't have experience in that space, it's actually
Uh-huh.
one of the professors in UCL coming to me of this idea. He says, "I've seen people paying like 100, 200 pounds per time just to render a face using a very shitty technology in some of the clinics that he saw." I was like, "Wait, people pay 200 pounds for that? Then let's build something." Yeah, so yeah, we rolled out this retail app, and it's actually all live, so people can now use it. And that's exactly the case. Private AI can work, right? You worry about your personal data, and you don't want to. Of course, that's your baby's face. Well,
Mhm.
possibly if it's accurate, right? You want to
Mhm.
make sure it's safely in your own on your own devices.
That's an
Yeah.
amazing example. Love that. And you recently shared some news about the partnership with Walrus. Talk a little more about what this Walrus partnership means and how it helps you guys going forward.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually led by Sui Foundation as well. So it's a whole Sui Foundation strategy to
Hmm.
having more solid AI partners like us. Sorry, yeah, to co-building with them, because as many people probably know, Sui is based on the Move language, right? And comparing to many other languages, there isn't enough Move language developers in the world. Anyways, so
Hmm.
we actually built this Move language LLM that can help Move builders to quickly get on board with this language, and actually building with this language when they build on Sui, when they build their ecosystem on Sui. So that's one of the delivery products that we're co-building with Sui Foundation and Walrus as a private storage company. The importance of I mean, it's an important part that they play in this whole decentralized training or decentralized Move language scenario, where you don't have to upload all your code bases into
Hmm.
a central server somewhere, right? So all the decentralized stored, and then you can be safe that, okay, I'm only my own worst instance, and I'm not sending it over to any third party, but my model can still run on such personalized Move language data that can help me, code my Move language better. So that's kind of the story behind it, and I think it's super important because in my image, crypto AI is basically three important parts in AI that need to be decentralized, right? Compute, data,
Yep.
and model. That's
Yep.
three things, right? Of
Yep.
course, there's application on top of this, but that's a totally another layer where
Hmm.
application you can build lots of applications. But for
Hmm.
foundation, it's only the three. So there are people decentralizing the GPUs, of course, we see lots of those. There are people decentralizing data, which Walrus is one, a major player on Sui, right? And there are us building decentralized models. So yeah, generally all these collaborations we welcome, and we happy to collaborate with them to build this strong triangle on Sui.
Very cool. So, kind of last question for you. Where do you see this going? Give us a prediction for how your privacy preserving AI could look like in the future? And maybe adjacent question or bonus question on there. Everyone in the space is so excited about AI agents, right? It's this all year long. Agents, agents, agents. I understand that you guys are at a kind of a deeper, more foundational level, but I'm guessing that agents are still somehow, somewhere in on your roadmap and in your landscape. How do you see us evolving, and what's the prediction for the future?
Yeah, I would say, well, yeah, I'll come back to agents question.
Yeah.
And first of all, in terms of the decentralized models, I would say, as our company slogan says, not your model, not your AI, right? So just
Mm-hmm.
like the slogan, not
Mm-hmm.
your private key, not your wallet, right? So I want everyone to own their own model. So they don't have to, give the evaluation process or the data privilege to any third party. They can
Mm-hmm.
all control everything so that your model is yours. So
Mm-hmm.
on that sense, I would say we will see lots of such ecosystem growth and collaborations between different industries in this whole world, not only just
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, banking, which everyone knows, right? But also down to the everyday life, that daily life,
Yep.
everyone owns their own model on their own phone. Because if you think about this, like the compute power of your A16 chip of iPhone today, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's already super powerful 10 years ago back, comparing to a computer maybe at that time,
Sure.
right? So thinking about it, and then maybe 5 years later, everyone might run a iPhone with a GPU 4090 type of power as of today. So if you think of the model of today running on such huge GPUs are good enough, then 5 years later, or maybe not 5 years, maybe 2, 3 years later, everyone will carry a machine like that on their pocket. So you will see that
Yeah.
those AI
Yeah.
can be super, super powerful. And back to my point before,
Mm-hmm.
small language models, SLMs, can
Mm-hmm.
play a vital role because at that time, maybe even a 40 billion, 70 billion model are
Mm-hmm.
considered as small language models
Mm.
because centralized
Wow.
model can go way higher, right? So that's what I see in the future. And then go back to the agentic question, which I also super believe in this. We
Mm-hmm.
already work close with Base Network for their MCP developments. Actually, we are their main MCP provider in terms of the models behind those MCPs.
Mm-hmm.
And also they released their X402, the payment protocol for the agents, everything, right? So I think in the future, every agent hopefully will have their own model that can actually train and run using their own experience, well, data as I mean experience, right? Just like every agent is a human life, right? They will encounter everything in their own agentic life, and then they will learn more using their own model, and then they will react differently. So every agent will be different.
Wow. And their agents will have their own agents who will have their own models. So I'm imagining it's like billions and billions of agents and sub agents and sub agents. So we're
Oh my God.
infinite models multiplying infinitely. Amazing. Thank you so much. Congrats on what you've built. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to both Marta Belcher, the president of the Filecoin Foundation, and Jiahao Sun, the CEO of Flock. And thank you again to Gensyn, my partner for season 2 of The People's AI. Gensyn is a protocol for machine learning computation. It's building the network for machine intelligence that includes execution, communication, verification, and coordination software across every viable computer or device on the planet. And thank you to you, dear listener. If this is your first time here at The People's AI, please subscribe. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Send to a friend, send to someone who's concerned about AI privacy. Thanks again, and see you next time.